Welcome to Roots and Riches, the podcast where we believe that personal and financial well-being are uniquely yours and not one size fits all. On this journey, we are all about empowering you to take control of your life and your finances, building wealth that resources both outwardly and inwardly. I'm Janiska Jules, the dynamic force behind Roots and Riches. In each episode, we'll dive into the ways social, economic policies, and mindset impact our identities. Join us as we uncover stories, strategies, and insights that will help you forge a path to personal and financial richness, embracing the unique journey that is yours alone. So get ready to dig into your roots, discover your riches, and transform your future. Welcome to Roots and Riches. Let's start building your legacy. Today on Roots and Riches, we're thrilled to welcome Sherring Dartiguenave. Sherring is a writer and an editorial professional with over 20 years of experience in book, magazine, and digital publishing. She earned a BA in writing, literature, and publishing from Emerson College and an MFA in creative nonfiction writing from the New School University. A Brooklynite by way of Boston, she serves on the board and has been published on the blog of the New York chapter of the Women's National Book Association, the anthology 2020, The Year That Changed America, and other outlets. You can follow Sherring on her blog, justsherring.com, and also on Instagram at justsherring. And so, let's get started. Welcome, Sherring. Our viewers to get to know you, so tell us a bit about yourself and how did you decide to your career path, and also how you decided to start your blog.
Career path and blog are both very closely related. I've always been a reader. One of my earliest memories of my mother, who's passed when I was young, was of us unboxing a book of Dr. Seuss books. And my father's always encouraged me to read as well. He was a reader. I remember he used to always read Time magazine and save them. He would keep them stacked in he actually had an office. And he would also, I don't know where he found it, but he always was reading there was a Haitian newspaper. And when he was done reading it, he would fold it up and mail it to his brother down in Florida. And as kids, we always had to read at least for an hour. I mean, I didn't mind it. I didn't have to be told to read, but the boys hated reading. So I've always loved reading. It's always been an escape for me. And so career path, how I ended up in publishing, the original plan was, surprise, surprise, I wanted to own a bookstore. I wanted to own and run my own bookstore, but and so that's why I actually ended up at a college, a business school college, because I had to learn how to run a business. But girl, that did not work out. My balance sheets never balanced. I am a words person. I am not numbers, and it didn't work out, so I had to leave. So even after I left the business school, I went to UMass Boston, and then I was majoring in Black Studies. I got to read a whole bunch of black books and all that. I don't know if you remember that. That was the phase where I had a huge afro.
Yes.
But even then, I was just like, well, what am I going to do with a Black Studies degree? And I happened to be working at a publisher, one of the top publishers at the time, but I wasn't necessarily an editorial, and they had a mentoring program. And my mentor was just like, I know you may not want to start all over again, because every time you transfer schools, you lose credits. And she's just like, I suggest you go to Emerson, and they actually have a specific writing, literature, and publishing school degree, everything. You can immerse yourself. And so I so I transferred there. And that was my major, writing, literature, and publishing, with a focus mostly on book publishing and a minor in book marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So again, books. And then when I moved to New York, I worked for a magazine first, and now I'm in digital publishing and legal publishing. So, and my outlet, that's why I'm in the Women's National Book Association. We meet that, so it was a great way to meet already established authors, burgeoning authors, and my blog. So I am going to grad school because, again, like I said, I wanted to be an editor. So when I went to get my master's in writing, it was more so I could understand what the writing process is like from the writers that I'd be working with, what their perspective would be and how challenging it is, so I could be a more empathetic and sympathetic editor. And then lo and behold, I discovered I actually had a skill of writing. So, which I didn't think I had because I journaled all the time since childhood. And even though those were always my favorite classes in high school, I took AP English and all that stuff, whatever. I just never considered myself a writer. I was always reader, reader, reader. And so then when I was done with school, I was still taking workshops and stuff like that. Actually, it's the reverse. I was taking a bunch of workshops, and I figured if I keep taking these writing workshops, I might as well get a degree in it also. And so that's when I got my master's. And then when I was done, I needed a portfolio more so than just my work I was doing in grad school. So I figured my blog could work as not only a creative outlet, but also as like my living, breathing, up-to-date portfolio so that things wouldn't be dated. And I just kept going with it because it's mostly bookish stuff. Like I don't call my blog post book reviews because it'll start out as like a summary, but it's more of my reaction because I don't really like, this is where it would have been hard being an editor. I don't really like critiquing people's writings because that's their brain baby. Like even for me, when I was in workshops, it was very hard to read, even if it's constructive, but you're just like, but I love that part. That's my, that's my creative outlet and things like that. So I mostly write from the perspective of like, what did the book make me feel? What did it remind me of? And so it's kind of half book review, half personal essay for most of them. So that's where that came from. And then random thoughts too, because they're not all book related. Sometimes it could be like, if I had a good day, I had a bad day, I'm in my feelings. I watched a good movie. I had a good outing in New York because there's always something to do. Again, because I wanted to serve as a portfolio. So as I'm applying for these jobs, whether it's magazines or book publishing, you have to show your range. So reviews and stuff like that.
I mean, you're clearly a creative, and just knowing your background coming from a Haitian American family, one of the things that I know it's common is sometimes they don't support your creative side. They look for you to do like really practical type of work. Like, what's that? You want to be an artist? You want to be a chef? No. You want to be a writer? No. But what I find interesting about what you just said is your parents both were natural readers, so that they also had their creative side. Out of curiosity, what were their professions? Did they themselves, like you, wanted to do? Any writing or publishing, etc.?
Well, let's make it clear. I was not encouraged to follow that as a career. As you said, as a Haitian and as a girl, I better be a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer. And as a kid, I was like, what is an engineer? Like, that's all we ever heard, right? Engineer, doctor, lawyer, nurse. And I'm just like, I don't want those. I was encouraged to read. Like, I was one of those kids where I was one of those kids when the Scholastic Book Fair was happening. My father had no limit. He would give me $100, so I'm like filling out the little
the old time school. Yeah, I remember those things.
Yeah. I was getting all types of free gifts because remember, if you buy a certain amount, you get free posters, you get free bookmarks, you get free markers or whatever it was. So I was always getting gifts, and sometimes I would get so many books that I couldn't carry them all home in one trip. I would have to leave some at school and bring them home piecemeal. So I was encouraged to read, but I wasn't, and I was encouraged to, and as a kid you're encouraged to color and all that stuff. But it wasn't necessarily, that wasn't the path I was encouraged to follow. And in their defense slightly, even back then I didn't think it was something I could follow as a career. Again, I never considered myself a writer. Things like that. I considered myself a reader, and then as I got older, the dream to own a bookstore, that partially stemmed from, actually I don't know what that stemmed from. I just knew I wanted to be surrounded by books that would all be mine. Because that was also something else. My father didn't necessarily take me to the library. I knew about the library because of school, but not because of my parents or anything like that. My father was always just like, you can own all your books. So then what better ownership of books than a bookstore?
Does that mean your father had a big library of books himself?
Not that I recall, because I don't know. Like I said, he read Time magazine and the Haitian newspaper, and I think there was actually more than one. And because I was a kid, I didn't pay attention to the name of the newspaper, because even for my own writing, I wanted to be to write about it and just see him reading. But I remember clearly the Time magazine subscription, and when those would come, because I would also sometimes read them, even though I was young, 8, 9, 10 years old. And that's partly how I was always interested in current events and things like that. So even as I became a teen, and he would give me money not only for books, but then I didn't have a checking account, so then I get a money order. So then I had my own subscriptions to like magazines I should not have been reading. Probably like I subscribed to Ebony, Essence, Jet, the now defunct Sassy, 17, way before I was 17. Things like that. So I think from those I borrowed, and then at least once or twice a year, because I would go through all the books that I already owned, even with Scholastic, and once you get older, there's no more Scholastic. Once or twice a year, my father would take me to the bookstore, and he'd be like, remember, this one books were like $4.99, $6.99, $7.99, and he'd be like, you have X amount of money limit, and it would be like 100, 150, and you have like an hour, and you go to a bookstore, and you like go, and I come back. And so that's the only time I would like actually work on math, because I remember I said me and numbers don't work, but I had to keep track of how much money I had for the books I was pulling. And then even if I went over, if I really, really wanted it,
you still get it?
Yeah, I can be crazy over. But if it's over like by 1 or 2 books, I can get it. But if it's over by like 6 books or whatever, then no, you can't do that. But
yeah, I always
series or box sets. I had a few, like Anna Green Gables. Like, what girl didn't go through?
I did. I love that. I love that too. I still have it as an adult. So, and if I admit it, I actually reread it during the pandemic because I wanted to. It was like comfort. It was comfort. Like, go back to your and feel.
Answer your original question. I forgot to that.
No, I asked about your parents. It's interesting to me because us being of Haitian background, I'm very familiar. We're very familiar of. They tend to push you away from their being creative, but yet most of us, if it's not us, we have siblings who are very creative, and clearly they inherited from their parents who never pursued it. But yet, I find Haitian culture in general to be a very creative culture, but yet they always push you away from that creativeness.
And the music
which is always very interesting. And it made me think of your parents both being readers, if that's what made them connect in the first place, right? That common love of reading, and it passed down to you. So, just to move on, I did hear before when you were saying, your original plan was to get to get a bookstore, manage it, but then you also tried to break into publishing, but that's been hard. Can you elaborate a little bit what made that hard? Is it just you plainly that you're a Black woman and it's not a lot of Black women in the industry, or are there just other barriers in terms of not having the connections, etc., that make it a little bit harder to break in?
Yeah, I think all of that plays a part, but I wouldn't lean too. That definitely plays it would have a chunk, but I would lean more towards it's definitely an industry that hires and moves from within. I even experienced that when I was working for publishing when I lived in Boston, and I could see how people would move up through the ranks. And then when I was at Emerson, I did have unpaid internships where I was working at publishers. And things like that. But when I moved to New York, my first job at a magazine company was, and it's fair because I was fresh out of college, I was editorial coordinator. And then when I left them and joined another publishing company where I am now, I started as editorial assistant, and now I'm senior content acquisition associate editor. So there's all that. But when I started at the company I'm at now, it was a small startup. Right, and then we ended up getting gobbled up by a huger company. And if and when I leave, whoever replaces me has to have a JD. I don't have to. I was basically grandfathered in because I was there from the beginning and stuff like that. And it's also harder for me to move up where I am right now because I don't have a JD. Because again, it's legal publishing with acquisitions and stuff. But as for other trade publishing, it is hard because again, I feel like even when the jobs are posted, if they're posting for a director or a new editor or whatever, there's other people in the department where they are probably hiring from within. So even in my networking, when I'm able through the Women's National Book Association and other things, where I can like have connections, if you will, or whatever, to submit my resume, and it's just sometimes the offers aren't good. So I may get interviews and the offers aren't good. That's everything. Publishing does not pay much. That you know, that's so even for the ones that I want a higher salary, I may not want them. I may not get those offers, or when people do come after me, like on LinkedIn and other stuff, they're like still offering me like entry level positions, and I've paid my dues already. I'm not going back to entry level. I have a master's, and like I said, my whole resume is publishing and books and all that stuff. Whatever. I'm not starting over as an editorial assistant. Like I've already done that. So that's kind of what's hard. Of just the breakthrough, or you make it as far enough, and also the publishing industry, it's very rocky. It's been going up and down. Like because I follow it, there's a lot of times where there's a lot of layoffs, and that's scary. And also there's a lot of like cannibalization. The bigger publishers just keep on eating up the smaller ones. Like a major one, Penguin Random House. That was two major big separate publishing houses, and I can't remember how many years back, but now
they became one.
They've merged. Yeah, and then there was, I think there was a lawsuit. The government had to do a lawsuit to stop where there was going to be another larger merger between two large publishing houses. And whenever that happens, there's overlap. Like if companies keep buying each other, there's overlap of positions and things like that. So it's not even even.
Out of curiosity, as someone who doesn't know a lot about publishing and how does that work, does it create a lack of diversity around what books are being offered out there for readers, or is it actually a good thing that people are getting, publishers are merging into one big one?
Well, see, I can speak on that on the fact that just because I read articles about the publishing industry, since I'm not on that side of it, I can't really see. I don't really have eyeballs in. But even when it was there, you rarely see minorities in general, and it is a big push of like even on the reader side, where it's just like you hear initiatives about like read diverse books and read diverse books and stuff like that, because it does play a part in like who, just like in movies and everything, producers. It's just like who's deeming a manuscript when it's submitted to be published by a company, who's deeming it worthy as like a universal story and stuff like that. And then also, so it falls under like when you're hiring certain editors. You want editors who quote unquote have a good eye and can distinguish a good story. So again, that plays into diversity and not just Black people, but just all minorities and things like that. So. Just like with other industries, remember during 2020 where everybody's just like, yep, let's get more Black folks on our boards and our, everything. Just hire more Black people and diversity. What do we keep seeing in the headlines now? The DEI has been dismantled. So-and-so who was hired, as head, VP of diversity, this, whatever, they're all getting, it's the same thing in publishing. Because remember, it's still a business, it's still an industry, so it's the same thing. Not to say that there aren't breakthroughs, and obviously we have our bestsellers. And me as a reader, I've always, especially around my teens, I've always sought out like the Black stories. I remember one time I had a job, like I always read on the train and stuff like that. So when I get in at work, whatever I'm reading, whether it's a magazine or book, I would put on the corner of my cubicle. And I remember I had a coworker who was just like, why are you always only reading Black stuff? And I was like, well, I am Black, right? Like I should be reading our stories, right? If I don't, who won't? And I remember when I worked at a bookstore, one of the bookstores that I worked at, I loved the fact that they had a Black section. Because I could zone in and easily find the authors and the stories that I was looking for. But I would, because I worked there, I would also take some of those books and stick them in, because they would be sometimes mixed in with the regular fiction. Yeah. But I wanted, if there's multiple copies, I would leave some there. So like people like me who want to zone in on
Black stories, but then also
whatever could find them. But also, if anybody else is browsing along because it's alphabetical, then they would fall. Because back then it was like the Terry McMillans and what was her cousin? I'm gonna blank on a bunch of names. Jerome Dickey, Omar Tyree, all those that we probably could have been reading. in our teens and 20s and stuff, because it was like, they're grown stories. Um, but yeah, I loved all those back
So
then.
what I'm hearing is what you said is, I mean, at least in that environment, it was good to have a section that had books that spoke to Black stories or easy to find, but also Black stories are all people's stories. So it was good to have it in the sections that are just a general, because we don't do that with Caucasian or European stories. We just say this is the general section, and it should be the same
Right.
no matter what minority you are, right?
And you'll hear the argument on both sides of just like of Black writers and minority writers, where it's just like a story is a story.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it have to be a Black story, or why does it have to be an Asian story, whatever? But again, sometimes when we know it's specific to our group, that's when we can come out harder and support and read and stuff like that. It's not that I don't read white books, especially like if it's a very popular book. A good book is a good book, period, right?
Yeah.
Again, I prefer to read like Black stories, and um, as a kid, I can't say that I was represented, because obviously Anna Green Gables was not me. Beverly Cleary and Ramona Kundi was not me, and stuff like that. Even though I wasn't of age when I was reading the Terry McMillans and the Omar Tyrese and the Eric Jerome Dickies and all that stuff, those were Black characters. Because like when you're in high school and you're in college, you daydream about what kind of adult you're going to be, and being Haitian was drilled into us. You better marry and have kids and blah blah blah. So it's just like, okay, since I didn't date, I had to learn about relationships, as dysfunctional as they might have been, in these novels. So that's how I was able to, see me and stuff like that. But again, like I said, even with the magazines, 17 magazine was not catering to me specifically. There were not Black models in there. And like when they would do their beauty tips of what to do with your hair, I better not. I better not do what they're doing to their hair. But I can exfoliate my skin and some of the lotions that they would use. But like when they would do like, oh, use this highlighter, use this bronzer. What I need highlighter and bronzer for?
Yeah.
Even though now I do know some people do, but like they're like the best tanning lotions and stuff. Okay, I can skip that part. But I do like a good lotion. I do like a good facial cleanser and stuff like that. So those things I could pull out, and Ebony and Essence, those did highlight me. But again, that was for older folks. But I was still, I was still reading it.
Yeah. So it sounds like even when we were young, there were stuff that was catering to older Black demographic, but still the younger teenager. I don't know if it's better now because I'm just out of that demographic and I haven't paid attention too much. But what do you gravitate to reading now? Like, what's a good book for you? What's a good read on a lazy day for you? What type of book you would naturally gravitate to?
If you were here, I would put your hand. You never ask a reader.
The audience needs to understand.
You never ask a reader, oh, what's your favorite book or whatever. I'm one of those where it just depends on the way the wind is blowing, who my favorite author is, what my favorite book is. I have the same problem with songs and music and stuff like that. I will say, for years and years, and there's probably like a psychological reason behind it and all that stuff, whatever. I love memoirs, right? I love memoirs more. That's my number one. And I've always loved, and it doesn't have to be famous people. I've always loved reading memoirs because this is where it's going to get a little bit sad. I like the fact that in real life, real people went through something and they came out on the other side. Things, it came out positive. It had a positive result, positive return, whatever you want to say. Because, like, obviously in the fiction novel, happily ever after. Whether that's the author's choice or even if the editor's like, oh, the book can't end this way and stuff like that. Like, I don't want a false story to like give you hope, even though good books will give you hope. And now that I've stopped being, I will say I'm also a reformed snobbish reader. Because I was the type who was just like, adults shouldn't be reading YA, young adult novels. Oh no, I love them now. And stuff like that. So that's, and you can learn from fictional characters and stuff like that, like the lessons and what they go through, whatever. But I always prefer memoirs. And more often than not, it would be Blacks or minorities, because we're, the ones going through the most heavy stuff. But on the flip side, I also do love historical fiction. I went through a serious mystery thriller phase, like in my teens and in my early 20s. It didn't help that I also worked for a publisher that was publishing James Patterson. So I loved me some James Patterson, which I think I'm about to dive into again, because at this point he has like 50 million books. And I stopped, but now they're doing a series on Alex Cross on his books, and Aldous Hodge is starring in it. And not only for the book factor of it, but like it's fine as Aldous Hodge, so I think I want to watch. And that's another thing where I'll tend to read. Like once I find out that a series or a movie was based on a book, I will not watch it until I read the book.
Oh, you see, I'm the opposite. I'll watch it and then I'll read the book to see how it differs.
I can't do that because now the adaptation is in my head. Now I can't picture the characters as I would like, and stuff like that. And also, you know, fellow book readers, book nerds will always agree. Like, rarely do we say, "Oh, the adaptation was better than the book," right? So when you read the book and then you're watching to see what they changed and how true they stayed to the book, and stuff like that. Because and then there's I rarely reread books. But if I learn a book that I've already read and I really want to be able to compare and contrast, and I don't know why I do this because it's not like a homework assignment. I might reread a book or something like that because like
I do have another question, but I want to ask, where are you with the audio versus actual reading? Because I used to do audio, and because I actually felt that helped me actually read more books. Since I left school, to be honest, I don't think I read as much as I should. And so I started to do audio so I could listen to books because of the time. But then one day I was like, no, I want to go back into actually reading because I felt like my skills of not only reading and writing were diminishing because I wasn't reading as much as I used to. But I find that I just don't have the time. I honestly admire people who say 7, 11, or books read a month.
I remember I said I'm a reformed book snob, so I am pro audiobooks, and I am on the side of just like hush to all those people who claim that audiobooks isn't real reading, because it is. And what honestly would help flip my mindset on it is just like that's such a what's the phrase, saying that audiobooks isn't reading, that's such a it's a slight to like those who are unable to read, whether it's because of vision impairments or can't hold whatever's the case. I slowly tiptoed into audiobooks. At first I couldn't handle it. I got too confused. I couldn't follow it, especially if it's some books might have more than one narrator. I couldn't do it. I first did it because I had like a free trial to Audible. I was like, let me give this a try, because like if you tell me free about anything and it's related to books, yeah, sure, I'll try it. So, and like I said, the first book I tried to borrow on audiobook was actually, I remember, it was called Americana by Chimamanda. I'm gonna mess up the rest of her name, so I won't say it properly. But it was it was like a scene in a hair salon, so there were lots of people talking, and I had no idea who was talking, so I couldn't do it. And I was just like, well, I like to read memoirs. Let me try a memoir and audiobook. And so that helped much easily. That helped me listen to it more easily. And so then when I did keep my Audible account, so then I kept it for, this is where, again, don't judge me, it's just different things. So I kept my Audible account for only celebrity memoirs. Because doesn't it seem like every other day, or if you pay attention to this stuff, it seems like every other day a celebrity's coming out with a memoir.
Yeah.
And so because I had and so hardcover books are more expensive, and they're going up and up. So in Audible, the base membership is like, now I think it's 14 something. So even then it was a little bit cheaper. So compare that to buying a book for 20 something, 30 something. So that's why I was keeping it for celebrity memoirs. But then, in order to save money as well, it's just like, just to share with everybody who's listening or watching, whatever, there's an app called Libby, and you can link it to your library card and borrow ebooks and audiobooks from your library, from the comfort of an app, of whether it's on your tablet, your phone, or whatever's the case. So I balance it that way, and that's how I actually listen to audiobooks for like thicker and longer books. I hate being trapped in a book for way too long. Like I max out at like 350ish or whatever. Because also the problem is I ride the train, I ride public transportation, and like carrying in a lot of times, here in New York City, you don't have a seat on the train. So I remember when my crazy self tried to read the Michelle Obama book, that's 700 pages, on the subway, and when you're carrying it, so that just turned into a home book. I did actually read the physical book. I never got the audiobook, but it took me a couple months because I just felt like I was trapped in a book. You know what I mean? It's not that her life wasn't interesting or whatever, but it just seemed it was a lot.
And it's interesting. I listened to the audio version. I did the audio of her book of it.
Well, I bought. Well, I had pre-ordered a book to like help with sales, and then I actually went on her book tour. She was at her tour was at Barclays, here in Barclays, so I was there. I don't know if I was delusional. I thought she might have been doing book signing. I have no idea why I actually bought the book and stuff like that. And then I received President Obama's memoir as a Christmas gift for me. I've yet to read it because his is also like a book stopper. And then also I didn't want to read it yet because he has 2 other books that I own. Like I said, I'll buy books and then not read them right away. So I do own Dreams from My Father, which was his first one, and then The Audacity of Hope, which I've adopted that. I haven't even read that book, but I've adopted that saying all the time. The Audacity of Hope. Like whenever I try to, I set a goal that seems difficult, but I still am just like, I can do it. I call it The Audacity of Hope. So yeah, I have those. And they're probably all standalone books, but I'd rather just read them all in order.
One of the best audiobooks I read, and I haven't read, or listened to a lot of audio, but one of the best was Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. He had me cracking up. I thought, okay, yeah, I should listen to this rather than read it because his rendition of it was so funny that I read it right after I had surgery, and I was laughing and my stomach would hurt because I was still in pain from the surgery, but listening to it I was like, ah, and then you're like, ow. And so it was, sometimes the audiobook way does work on that.
That was one of my favorite memoirs of all time. Not even celebrity memoir, because like he doesn't even dive into like when he was working at Daily Show, because this book came out. I think he was still at the Daily Show. Yeah. So that's actually one of my favorites. And when I finished, I was like, he didn't even talk about Daily Show. And so I saw when he was on a panel. So I saw when the book first came out. So I was able to see him speak about the book. It honestly is one of my favorites because just like he's just so smart. And it doesn't focus on his comedy, being a comedian and stuff. But yeah, his life story of literally being born a crime because you have your parents are an interracial couple and things like that, and just how he break down a lot of stuff and just like how it's different growing up. We have shared experiences, but obviously
in South Africa, it's a different.
South Africa, yeah.
Yeah, it was for me the most poignant and the most funny part, believe it or not, was the part where I think they're performing in a Jewish center.
Yes.
And they did not understand the significance of Hitler. But he grounded it where, a friend was nicknamed Hitler, but then he grounded it and explained why in South Africa they would not understand the significance and how that affects the Jewish community and why a black South African would be given the name Hitler. And so he did such a good job. It's like I was laughing hard during that.
And they're at the party saying, "Go Hitler."
Yeah. But he did such a good job to explain how that occurred in terms of lack of education, how that was purposefully done to the black South Africans, and etc. So he did, so as you say, he's really intelligent.
And when he breaks things down, it's not a lecture. Your eyes don't glaze over. You don't want to skip. And again, why would that have been something that you and I here in America, as Haitian Americans, would have had to think about or even consider? But like when he shares that experience,
to me was poignant. Was like you said, it's familiar even here in the United States, because if you think about when we were growing up in the 80s, what was popular? Dukes of Hazzard, right? I remember having a Dukes of Hazzard lunchbox, and being from a Haitian American family, we did not have a sense of the problematic issue with that, right?
And we still weren't talking about it anyways.
Like, yeah. So, and that's part of it is, our immigrant family background, but then also part of it is not being taught the history, the significance, etc. So it was very familiar. So even though it was a different context, I saw where that was coming from. But this leads me to another question I wanted to ask you about memoirs, because you said memoirs are, your favorite. One of the things that particularly I wanted to talk to you about is because I know of your love of reading, but also writing. And for me, part of RootsRiches is people understanding their roots in order to really be fulfilled in their richness, whether it's financial or personal, right? And from my perspective, memoirs are a way of telling your history, telling your legacy, right? And one of the things I found just from our background is, I think overall, when our parents were in Haiti, they had a sense of their background and their where they came from, because they kept that griot, like the traditional African griot type of storytelling. They didn't necessarily write it down, right? But as they immigrated here, and now their children are being born in the United States and other countries, right? I think the challenge is, how do you pass down that legacy, that history, that traditional griot of this is where your family's from, this is where you come from. When your family comes from a small rural area in a small country, I feel like that's easier to maintain. But as your family has immigrated and dispersed throughout the world, that's very difficult. As a reader and a writer, have you ever thought about that, even for your own family legacy? How do you maintain and pass on to the next generation the history now that we're not in the context of our family's original origin country?
No, I've thought about it a lot, but unfortunately, I don't know about your experience. There's a lot of pushback when you try to ask, or there was. Back when I was younger, there would just be a lot of pushback of just like you'd hear the adults talking amongst themselves, talking about so and so and who died and who's now come to America or went back and stuff like that. But like you wouldn't necessarily know who the people are, what the relationship is. I can't remember how I was before I found out, like, specifically how you and I were cousins. I just knew we were cousins. I didn't know mother's side, father's side. I did not know your mother and my mother were cousins. How ridiculous is that? Because it was never explained. We just know, well, family, cousinu, c'est cousinu. That's all I knew. Yeah. So I do remember, like, even in school, like in high school, we had to do a family tree. And my father was like, well, who wants to know? Who wants to know our business? Like, it turned into that. And then I was just like, well, it's a school assignment. I just need to know your parents' name, because I never knew his parents. Both passed, before I was born. And he took it as like an invasion of privacy. And because my mom had passed, I couldn't ask her, but yeah, I had the aunts and stuff. But it's still different. Like my mother's story, even though like the grandparents and things like that, they have that shared history, but my mother's specific story, I'll never have that. And now it's funny that you say that. So now, even now that I'm, leaning more into being a writer, and I have gone back to these same aunts and uncles and trying to ask stories, and sometimes there'll be a little resistance of just like, why are you asking? I'm just like, what deep dark secret do we have? I think it's just the culture of just like, you don't necessarily
tell everybody your business.
Yeah, unless there's a specific reason you don't share. But then once they get talking, you're just like, really? Because like one particular aunt, when I was asking her, I found out that like her grandmother was like 6 feet tall. So I hopped on the cousin chat and just like, did you know our great grandmother was 6 feet tall? And immediately the guys were just like, well, why did we get that height and stuff like that? It's just little things that would just be nice to know. I would like to know more, just so like, because I do like to write personal essays, and I do like to know just little bits and pieces of just like what I might have taken from certain relatives and things like that. Because I was young and my brother was so young. When I heard I don't remember, it was just a throwaway comment that somebody made. When I learned that my mother was left-handed, my brother's left-handed, I quickly ran and told him. I was like, did you know mommy was left-handed? And like, it's one thing that he kind of sometimes felt like an oddball about, because he's only a left-handed person. But like, I kind of like saw his shoulders, like, oh, mommy was left-handed. I'm like, mommy, and it's something good to know. I mean, it doesn't really change your life much, but it's just like, oh, I got that from my mother. And I have pictures of my mother and stuff like that. I don't think I look like her, but people always just like, you look like your mother, you look like your mother. I don't see it, but I do take it as a compliment and stuff like that, whatever. And just learning little things about my father. Like, I do remember this. I don't think I had answered it. One of the questions you asked way when we started is, what were my parents? My father said back in Haiti, and like, if he were to ever find out about this, I'd probably get in trouble. I think again, it might have been a throwaway comment. I might have been ear hustling or whatever. I think in Haiti he was studying to be a lawyer. But when he came to the States, so I grew up with my father. He was always some kind of driver. He was a cab driver, then he was and again, ear hustling. I think he got robbed too much. I got at gunpoint. He was like, forget this, and he became a school bus driver. But even that, school bus driver in the 80s, these rowdy kids.
Yeah.
He was always fights and all that stuff. But that is what he, eventually retired from, being a Boston public school bus driver. So that was interesting though, and that also, when I learned that, I was just like, I don't think it's the reason, but it's also part of the reason why all of us, if he was studying to be a lawyer, I wonder how much pressure that was from his own parents. Like, you've got to study to be a lawyer, where it also fell on us. You've got to be an engineer, doctor, lawyer. What am I missing? I can't remember what I'm missing. And then also the extra layer. The extra layer for me growing up was the expectation was that I had to marry a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. It's like, so y'all can control who I fall in love with and marry and have kids with? So, I mean, I guess the joke's on everybody, because I'm still single and I'm married.
But yeah, for me, the question for me around documenting your history, your legacy, because what we talk about a lot now, at least among the Black community, and I'm sure beyond, we talk about creating generational wealth. To me, generational wealth is financial, but also generational wealth to me is also passing down to your kids a legacy of who you are, where you come from. It's not by accident you got here. There were people before you, and this is their story, and because of all of this is why you're here now, right? And so passing down that legacy to me is important, or from my perspective is important, because that next generation is not only proud of where they came from, understand the history, but then they can move forward in the next step. Because sometimes I feel like we walk in ignorance a lot, and the ignorance is because we frankly just don't know the stories of our parents, the parents before them, and etc. on that. And so it's hard to pass down the legacy because we're walking in ignorance, right? And a lot of the things, like you said your brother is left-handed. We may have been ignorant to the part that his mother was, your mother was left-handed, but that comes from something. Who knows? His grandmother or grandfather, could have been, but we just don't know the history, of that. And so it's just wondering, how do we, as someone who documents or who likes memoir, I always like to ask that question, like how fascinated or how interested are you in trying to document that in order to move the next generation, or even your own community, your culture, etc., to the next?
That's such a good question, and complicated, because there is the curiosity factor, right? Even just outside of documenting, forget that I'm a reader, writer, whatever. There's the curiosity factor of just like, hey, what is my family, and what is my family like? What's my family from? What's the history? But there's the added layer for me as a person, as a woman who grew up motherless. So there's that huge shadow of just like, as a middle-aged woman, as as we're going through these changes, I can't go to my mother specifically and be like, hey, what was it like for you? Again, I can ask my aunts or sisters, but that's not necessarily her
her lived
my mother
experience.
did, I'm older than my mother made it to be. So there's that. So there's the huge question mark of that. And then, like you say, just knowing the stories. This is gonna sound crazy, but even just as recent as like 2 months ago when I went home to Boston, and so I was visiting my father and his twin sister, and one of my aunts, who's my mother's sister, was with me. So they're all, they all grew up together, they're all talking, and they're throwing out names. And a couple of times, so I'm sitting there like, it's like a tennis game. I'm going back and forth, like watching them talk and all that stuff, whatever. And then a couple of names I recognize, and the ones that I don't know, I would just straight up interject, like, who's this? And so it's only a couple of months ago that I learned of other sisters that my grandmother had. I knew of one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why am I, at this big age, how am I...
Only now knowing of it.
How am I to know more of my grandmother's other sisters? Like, granted they were in Haiti and stuff like that, but I just didn't know of their existence. So that's the curiosity factor. And then sometimes when these conversations happen, they're organic. Like I was in town visiting my father and my aunt, and my other aunt came with me. So they're organically talking. What am I going to be like, excuse me, let me grab a notepad? Like, what am I, you just try to listen and learn. So sometimes just the relationships, no matter what it is, relationship as in how you're blood related, how, people are married, who raised whom, and stuff like that. That in itself is an interesting story, but like, sometimes unless you ask or through a fluke and everybody else is catching up, you don't learn these stories. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to document in those ways. And so like my grandfather's 102. Can you imagine the stories? And he's the last one of his siblings.
Yeah.
Your grandmother being one of his
siblings. Yeah.
The stories that and just being 102, what he saw between Haiti and the changes, I always marvel for him. What kind of a mind freak it might have been for him to see the changes in technology throughout the decades and stuff like our phones can now record.
I mean, remember your grandfather was alive, which is around, I believe, when the Americans occupied Haiti, right? Your grandfather was alive, I guess, how many years after the Haitian Revolution when he was first born? 110 years, right? So there could have been people, the children or the grandchildren of the first, leaders of Haiti. So he might have known or interacted. Who knows? But there's a lot of stories he could tell us. And when my grandmother was alive, I just never thought of asking her. Now at this age, right? I'd be like, Grandma, both sides, like my father's grandmother, mother, and my mother's mother. I would have asked them so much questions. And same thing with my mom on that. But it's only in real adulthood, when we're more conscious and sentient, we're like, I wish I could have asked them that question.
Right, yeah.
On it.
Because I do wonder, like, what made him come here and eventually bring his kids over. And that's also the I don't want to call it weird, but I'm struggling to find the right word. It's like, so at this point, our parents, our aunts and uncles and all that stuff, they've been in America longer than they lived in Haiti. So
which is interesting, right? And also, I think if we knew their history, I don't think it's by accident, right? Because if you look at immigration patterns, even though I know where our family's from a very rural area of the country, there are always those with the most means who first are able to immigrate, right? So how was it that your grandfather, my parents, our parents immigrated to this country in the late 60s and 70s, where they weren't a lot of Haitians at the time? What was the catalyst? What gave them the means? What was the possibility? Because only because of those decisions that they made, we are here now, right? We are able to be here. And so it's interesting. I think the thing is, there's always, in traditional African culture, there's always a griot, designated griot. In our parents' generation, I don't know who is that, right? Who was that person? And then in our generation, I don't think there's anyone that. And so to me, it's an issue of adapting to the culture and the environment that we're now in order for those stories to continue beyond ourselves on it. So it's an interesting topic, but I do believe that that's one of, to me, going back to generational wealth, they always talk about, people of color, particularly Black people, don't have a lot of wealth because of lack of generational wealth, and that's true because of the history. But I also know part of it is not just the being left out of it from a financial institution, being left out of their stories, right? What were their stories? Because they didn't know, and because that was systematically done from an African American historical perspective. And at some extent, it's the same issue with us of Haitian background. We did know our stories, but once you start immigrating, they start getting lost a bit. And so how do we keep those stories so we can continue a legacy to the next generation? So, but with that, we are at the end. I just want to close without, I want to just kind of close by first just letting our viewers know, like, what's the next for you? Where can they find you? Remind us where we can find you. What's your next project? What should we be looking for?
I mean, just like you said at the top of the hour, my Instagram, well, my feed is mostly like books. You'll find mostly book related stuff, and then like when I want to show off my latest braided style or something, then you'll see like a picture of me. But for the most part, I post what I'm reading, plan to read, bookish events that I've attended. So that's on Instagram of Just Sherring. And then my stories themselves, those are all my random thoughts. Like if I see a post that like I feel like, whether it's funny or I feel like it expresses something that I can relate to or disagree with, because sometimes I'll just write whatever. It's just a way to talk to people. And then of course there's my blog, and I'm trying to, it comes in waves. I try to be, sometimes I call it my abandoned blog, because I can go like a full month or two and not post anything, and then there are other times I'm just like, gotta get this thought out. And just like with the reading, and the same thing with the writing, is I can get distracted. I have like even right now as we speak, I think I have like 10 Word docs open of like beginnings of drafts and different things to do. Because not just on my blog, I try to submit to publications, I submit to writing contests and like smaller literary mags, whether they're digital or print, just because I guess this is my way of leaving legacy, whatever. I don't want just my writing to just be stuck in between all my journals and stuff like that. And one of the greatest feelings is that after you write an essay, whether it's an editor or somebody who reads it, friends, family, whatever, they're like, oh, that was such a great story. And I mostly write personal essays, and I relate it to XYZ part. So that feels good. So my blog projects is... I have a lot of people. I will say this. I technically have probably 2 books done. One is a memoir. It's a collection of personal essays, because with all these workshops that I do, I always do personal essays. So I probably have a book in that. And then when I was in grad school, I wrote a short story that throughout the years I've been plucking away at turning it into a novel. So I just got to sit down. It's just scary. You know what I mean? It's scary putting that stuff out. So I should say this. I commend you on doing, because we talked about this already. I commend you on actually doing this podcast, and it seems like you're on the cusp of releasing it. I don't know when this one will come out. So yeah, thank you for having me on. And you actually put a battery in my back and just like, yes, get back to your work. And if you're putting out your blog, don't have the people logging on and finding like the last post was like, 2 months ago. Let them see something current. And the good thing about my blog is that I don't even do it. Somehow the algorithm will like suggest similar posts that I've written that go with it. So if people want to fall down a rabbit hole and just read my musings, please do. But yeah, I think I would prefer to like push my blog more, to actually push me into more of the writing space. And even though I'm not necessarily in traditional publishing anymore, I like having this outlet. And it kind of feels good that like I get to have this for me, and things like that. And then I do want to lean into, like you say, talking to our aunts and uncles and our elders to find out more of their stories. And then I can like pluck from those and actually write more stories, whether it's personal essays or fictionalized.
Yeah, I think there's a plethora of stories. I always said My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I love that movie because it was like, it reminded me of our Haitian family. Okay, with that, thank you again, Sherring, for being willing to be a guest on my new show.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad neither one of us referred to each other as our childhood nicknames.
Yeah.
In the family.
Yes, that is a good thing on that. And then for the audience out there, thank you for tuning in and being part of our community. Until next time, keep nourishing your roots and growing your riches. I'm Januska Jules, and this has been Roots and Riches. Take care and see you on the next episode. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn. And goodbye.